We're continuing work on this Hawken kit today, and we have everything fitted, and the stock here on the end, on the butt stock, is fitted to our butt plate. What we're going to do now is come up here to the front end to our nose cap, and we have a little bit of extra wood up here that we're going to take down to make the stock match with the nose cap a little bit. After that, we're going to move on to finishing and polishing our brass hardware. This is going to include the patch box, trigger guard, butt plate, and any other little bits and pieces on here that we want to get cleaned up and get some of the machine or casting marks off of. So let's jump into it. So the part I'm talking about is this right here. You can see we have, I don't know, probably a 1/16 of an inch of wood above this nose cap here, and we have this nice curve started with that nose cap. So what we want to do is bring that curve that starts with this nose cap up through the stock gradually so that we get a nice gradual transition on this line from the stock down into the nose cap. Now I just kind of do this by eye, I think, if it was me, but for the video here I'm going to show you what I'm thinking. I want this to be nice and gradual, like I said, so I'm going to come back here and just kind of mark a starting point just above this wedge here. That's going to give me just a nice, hardly noticeable change along there. Now I'm not putting a hard line there, I'm more so just getting it in my head the direction of that. So we're going to put this into the gun vise, and with our probably one of our safe edged files here, we're going to go through and clean that out. So to keep this even, we're going to knock the barrel out, take it over the gun vise, and work both sides at the same time with our file so we have a nice even continuation of this line on both sides. That way we don't have to worry about messing up the barrel at all, putting any more nicks and scratches in there that we're going to have to take out. So I'm taking this large wood file here, and I'm just going to work this slowly from here where our barrel wedge was, forward down the stock towards the muzzle, just slowly until we start to line up with that nose cap. We want to take off the same amount on both sides, keep that even. It's hard to tell, but looking at it, we're getting some change there, which is good. I'm just going to keep going nice and easy. Kind of starting farther and farther forward as I go, just to keep that a nice gradual change. This isn't something that you by any means have to do. This is just, I think, a nice little detail that you can add into one of these kits to make it look a little bit nicer. So you can hear that at the end of the stroke, I'm starting to hit this nose cap, which is good. That's exactly where we want to be. So I'm coming in here and feeling this. There's still a little bit of a jump there. So I'm going to keep working it just a little bit more. Because we're going to polish that nose cap more, I want to make sure that we get the wood flush now. That side there is nice. We just get a little bit more off of this side. Before we move on, I'm just going to take the file down this outer edge and get rid of any burr that we might have developed there. Let's knock that down. And you can see that now we've lost that bump that we had there on that stock, so we've got a nice gradual line on that stock now. And that's a really easy, I think that just took a few minutes to go through and change that, so that looks much nicer now. I'm real pleased with how that came out. So what I want to do next is add a little bit of detail, of handcrafted detail, to this otherwise machined out ramrod pipe. If you look real close, and if you have one of these kits, you're going to be able to see and feel those machine marks up and down this. And the wedding bands that put in are pretty basic. It's just a simple cut all the way through there. What we're going to do is use a file to enhance those wedding bands a little bit and get us a little bit more hands-on practice with this kit. To do this, I'm going to use our dovetail file that we used earlier to work on the dovetails for our barrel tenon. This dovetail file has cuts on one face and two triangular faces opposite it that have nothing, have no teeth on them. So we can cut and work without worrying about messing up that wedding band. What I'm going to do is I've got my file, I'm going to set the teeth down and I'm going to lock in that edge with the edge of that wedding band, just like this. So the only thing that I'm cutting is this bottom face. So I'm going to move the file around the pipe, keeping my file kind of in a curving motion as I go around there. And that's going to start to bevel the inside edge of that machine cut that Tradition's put in there to put a wedding band on those ramrod pipes. And I'm going to do this all the way around and just keep going around in a circle, always lining up my toothless edge with the established cut. And this is going to give us a nice even bevel all the way around. And by rotating this, I'm making sure that I don't get any flat faces on here. We want this all to be pretty round. You can make a few cuts and then look at it here. You can still see that machine line in there. Now what I'm trying to do is get my filed edge to come in and match with that machine line so that it looks like the whole thing's been filed. And once I can't see that machine line anymore, that's when I know I'm going to stop. I know I'm not going too far into the ramrod pipe and I'm getting a nice look with it. You'll find that coming out to the edge of the vise like this, where you can take your file all the way around, is going to lead to just a bit longer and more natural strokes. It's going to get the job done all that much faster. Stop and look at it here. I'm just about down there to that machine mark. I can still see a difference in my filing and where that machine mark is. So we have a little bit farther to go. When you're turning this, you want to make sure that you're turning it so that part of your cut from your next cut will interact with the space that you cut on your last cut. So if I started my cut here, I'm going to rotate that around so that start point is about halfway into my next cut. It's going to help keep a nice even surface all the way around and prevent flat spots. Now looking at it, I just see a few spots where we can still see that machine line. We're just going to go around and touch those up. Oop. And just kind of erase those out of here. Now a really fast way to do this would be to chuck this up in your lathe, get it spinning, and then just go in there with your file. And you could probably buzz that in here in about, I don't know, 5 seconds. But this is how I learned how to do it. This is how I've watched people do it. And it gives you a nice, natural, kind of, traditional look to it. So we're going to flip this over, do it to the other side, do our other ramrod pipe the same way so that we have a matching set. And then we'll start working on cleaning up the machine lines here on the main pipe. So the first piece that I'm going to be cleaning up is one of our ramrod pipes here. It has a lot of just kind of machine marks in it here. We've already put in and established our wedding band a bit more with our file. So what I'm going to start with here, pretty rough piece of 180 grit sandpaper. It's been used quite a bit, but I'm not looking to really move a whole lot of metal. So starting with this 180 that's been worn out a little bit is nice, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here like this. And with that ramrod pipe gripped into that vise, I can just run this 180 grit all over about half of that ramrod pipe. and just try to get it cleaned up, polished up, get rid of those machine marks and any other nicks and scratches that I may have left there while working on it. Not by any means scientific or really artisanal at all. This is just a nice fast way to get that cleaned up. Not sure if you can see it. This is the side that we just sanded some, and then here is the machine side where you can still see a lot of that grain from the tool. So we're going to flip it over, hit the other side with that sandpaper, and then we're going to go up to a 240 grit. And then the highest that I'm going to take this is about a 400 grit sandpaper. I'm not going for a high polish here or a real fancy gun, and I'm going to try to age it a little bit, so I don't want it to start off super nice. So want to make sure while you're doing this that you wrap that sandpaper around and hit those areas that you you want to overlap the areas that you just worked on. That makes sure you get full coverage and you hit every piece or every part of the pipe. And I'm getting right up to the edge too and making sure I get those outer bands that we established, because those are just wide enough that they could show some of those machine marks still. We don't need that. So I do a little bit and I check it and I wipe it off. Looks like we could still use some. So I'm just going to plop it back in there. I'm going to start with this 240. As far as safety goes, I've got a little ventilator box here we're going to turn on that's going to suck up a lot of this dust while I'm working. If you don't have that, just a simple N95 mask or any kind of shop respirator might be a good idea if you're going to be doing a lot of this. And as you get a shinier and more of a polished surface on there, you want to be careful with that dust and try to knock it off, because that dust that you're filing off of there will scratch it. I noticed it just as I've wiped some of it off with my thumb, I've left some more scratches in there. So depending on how nice you want that to end up being, you want to be careful about those filings. So this is the high polish sandpaper I'm going to be using. It's what this is called, finishing film, I guess, 40 micron, and it's a real fine sandpaper. I don't know what it compares to technically. I'd say it's probably close to about a 400 grit just looking at it, and this is what I'm going to use to get my finish polish on these brass parts. So we started at 180, went to 240, and now we're going to go to this semi 400 equivalent. Just doing the same process over and over again here. Pinching it in the vise and then running this across it until we get the look we want. So here's both my pipes. This one we took up to the 400, and this one is still down at the 180, I believe. So you can see there's a little bit of change there. Now if we wanted to get real close here, we can go into these wedding band channels that we cut as well. I'm just going to set those aside for now and take this one up higher and keep moving on to the other parts. Comically enough, when I was removing the wood to line up with the nose cap, I was using that rough file. And it seems to have bit me in the rear end a little bit here because I've really marred up this nose cap. So it's going to take a little extra work. Got a little bit of a casting ding there. But we're just going to work our way through this and get this guy cleaned up. So on the bottom end of my nose cap had a little bit of a casting defect there, and to get rid of that or hide it, I'm just putting a nice chamfer around the whole bottom of the nose cap. This is going to give us a little bevel there, and it's going to hide that little defect and just pretty much make it disappear. The trigger guard comes round, and what I wanted to do was give it a little bit of decoration without removing any of the strength that the kind of bulk of the brass that it comes with gives it. So we don't want this to be too dainty, but I wanted to try out some techniques that I've read about and seen done that makes it a little bit more ornate, but also strong. So I began filing the 3-facet pattern that you see on there. Now on the main sections here, on this front curve and kind of this rear curve here, filing those facets in wasn't too difficult. The real trouble I had was going around these curves. Early on, I wanted to bring those curves, the facets all the way around those curves, but that's really, really hard, and I'm not very good at it. So in another build maybe, but a lot of times the gunsmiths would just bring those facets around the curve and then just kind of blend it into the round that's already there on your trigger guard. So don't get caught up in bringing those facets around these curves like you see here. Just kind of get them up close, blend them in with your file and then your sandpaper, and kind of just let those be natural. I also had, you'll notice in the video here, I had some trouble with the edges. Getting those angles right is real difficult, and that's kind of where the skill of filing comes in. Making sure that you're keeping those angles right and you're keeping those strokes consistent. On brass, not so much on iron or steel parts, you're going to notice that as you file, if you short stroke that file some, even your file or your sandpaper really, you're going to see some little scratches there. So I found the more I worked on it and the more I did it, the more I wanted to full stroke that file all the way to the end where I was going to have it blend out, because I started to have these little scratches and things show up halfway in my part where I was trying to polish just a little section, and keeping with the whole line of the piece going through is something that really helped. Once I had the initial filing down, I just kind of let it sit, I think overnight, on that. I wasn't sure how happy I was with it after the first day. I came back into the shop the next morning and took a look at it again, and kind of with some fresh eyes and some fresh thoughts about it, went back through and started to polish up that just a little bit more. At the end of the day, it's really easy to feel like you've been working on it for a few hours and it's good enough, you know, start the process, go on to the next step. But I found that stopping a little bit, taking the night off, and then coming back in the morning really helped me both continue to progress with my skills, but also I'm much happier with the process at the end. Once I went through and hit everything, all of my brass pieces with the 400 grit sandpaper, you end up with a nice kind of matte polish on things. It's polished. It's not as kind of factory polished as the parts come, but it has more of a handmade, you know, somebody worked on this look to it. And then I found that there were some spots where my technique was a little lacking. So there were some divots here, some scratches here that I just couldn't get even with my sandpaper, even up to that 400 grit. And on parts like my trigger guard and the butt plate and some of the inlet pieces, I didn't want to do too much more abrasive work on those because I started to worry that they wouldn't fit. There's some parts on my trigger guard where if you look at it from a certain angle, you can see where I took off just a little bit too much on those sides. And I didn't want that to happen on the parts that were going to be inlet into the wood where we'd start to see some nasty gaps in there. So I stopped with the 400 grit sandpaper, I put my files down, and I got out a cloth buffing wheel. The buffing wheel I used, I'm not even sure what buffing solution. I've got a variety here in the shop, but it's kind of a red buffing compound. Turn on the motor, hit the fabric wheel with that buffing compound a little bit, and that compound is really waxy, and that wax in there is embedded with small, you know, higher than 400 grit abrasive. So it's not going to be removing any material, but it's going to give that brass a nice even coating, something that is difficult to get with the sandpaper. And the neat thing about this is that it really works well with the curves of your parts. So the little nooks and crannies of that trigger guard were really hard to get in there with my fingers and with sandpaper. But the right buffing wheel, I could really get in there and really polish up those parts that were kind of rough in spaces. Again, this is not something that you have to do. If you don't have a wheel set up or a buffing compound, do not worry about it. That 400 grit polish on there, if it's good enough for you, then that's all that matters. For me, I could have left it. I was just curious to see how it came out, and I liked how it looked on the pieces I started with, so I went ahead and did it to all of my parts.